So my name is Dave Wald. I'm one of the emergency medicine faculty from Lewis Katz School of Medicine, formerly Temple University School of Medicine. And I've been lucky enough in my department to be able to chair our promotions committee. And for the most part, really what that's allowed me to do over the last probably 5 or 6 years is to work with a number of our junior faculty that are going up primarily from the assistant to the associate professor level, and obviously work a little bit more with some of our mid to senior level faculty. So in our system, we have a kind of a 3-tiered promotion system. Everyone starts out as an assistant professor, and then ultimately you go along one of 2 tracks, either the scholarly track or more the clinician educator track. And I think a lot of people tend obviously towards the clinician educator track, which is really what many of us are, clinician educators at heart. So what I'm going to focus on is a number of things today, and really kind of starting from scratch, kind of reviewing what a teaching portfolio is, and then really hopefully providing you with some background information and at least a good starting point. Now again, it's a small group here, so I think we can make this pretty informal. Where are you from? And where are you kind of in your career path right now? Are you at the assistant or the associate professor level? When did you finish your training?
I'm finishing this year.
Okay, great. So you're kind of the prototypical person that has this empty slate. So starting day one, you're going to be saving all this information so that when you do get the opportunity to develop your teaching portfolio, you haven't missed stuff like many of us, like I can't remember what I did 5 years ago, etc. So I'll try to focus some of this on kind of that early junior faculty. How about yourself?
First year faculty at Metro and Cleveland.
Great. And yourself back there?
Let's see, I am 11 years out from residency at Mass General Hospital in Boston.
Now, are you at the assistant or associate professor level?
So I am at the assistant. We start out at instructor.
Okay. So more of a four-tiered model. Yeah. And where we are really the only folks that I would say are clinical instructors are very junior faculty that are in fellowship programs, typically or let's say the medicine chief residents or our ultrasound fellows that are kind of somewhere between that fellowship and attending level. Since the ultrasound fellowship is non-ACGME accredited, then ultimately they function as faculty in the department, but in regards to promotion, they're still kind of considered within training. Dave, I know where you are, and I'm going to get you. No, I'm only kidding. So Dave is down at Duke, and you're at the associate or full professor level?
No, associate.
Okay.
But it should, we're finding my own, but also like in mind, my residents who are just starting out and want to help them on the lines.
How about yourself?
So here from Indiana University, 5 years as a clinical educator.
Great. So some of the things we're going to talk about really just getting off the start here is really what is a teaching portfolio. And I think you have to look at it akin to an artist's portfolio. It's really the opportunity for you to really describe your professional activities. And it's so much more in-depth and obviously very different than your CV, which is really more of a skeleton or kind of a framework. But your teaching portfolio really allows you to kind of put down on paper your worth. And I think when you take a look at a lot of the information that's out there on teaching portfolios, there's a huge reflective part of developing that document. But it's most purposeful for many of us for a promotion. There's lots of opportunities down the road for developing a teaching portfolio for potential educational awards or teaching awards. But I think primarily most of the time people put their teaching portfolio together, it's for promotion. It's for a promotion kind of pathway. And if you look at really what involves in the development of your promotion dossier, your teaching portfolio is only one piece of the puzzle here. You have your teaching evaluations, you have your CV, there may be letters of recommendation, both internal and external. There's going to be potentially even testimonials from other learners or educators that you've worked with. And then certainly in most departments, there's a department promotions committee, and then obviously your chair to support you by writing a chair letter. But if you look in more depth as to what your teaching portfolio really represents, and I think the way I have this is not realistic for many people. This kind of looks at all of these different areas, teaching evaluations, educational research, educational publications, etc., are all kind of an equal part of the puzzle. And I think what you realize is even within the room of a small number of folks, we all have different focuses with our academic careers. You're focusing on pediatric emergency medicine, so some of the educational endeavors and maybe some of the curriculum development that you'll be involved with down the road is going to look very different than maybe someone who's involved with standardized patients or someone who's involved with critical care that they talked about during the last lecture. So I think what you'll find is, as a clinician educator or a clinician scholar, some of these areas are going to represent a much larger part of your teaching portfolio. But I think when you take a look at the reflective part of this document, it allows you to kind of take a broader look back and identify, you know what, I really have no educational publications, or I have no educational presentations. And I think the goal for many of us is to have some pockets in each of these areas, although you certainly may emphasize one over the other. And I think I know I'm going to touch base on this in a couple of minutes, but also what you have to realize is we all have varied clinical interests. Some of us may be interested in toxicology or wilderness medicine or ultrasound, and I think you have to take sometimes some of those clinical interests and translate that into a teaching portfolio. And one of the things I struggle with at my institution is we have some faculty that it's a mindset change. One of my senior faculty who has been kind of stuck at the associate professor level for a long time, and I think part of it is he just hasn't had time to put his documents together to be promoted to the full professor level. He's our IT guru within our department, and he does a tremendous amount of quality assurance. He works with Epic, and he really has done a tremendous amount of things internally within our department that he still struggles with. How does that translate into a teaching portfolio? And I think what you have to realize is, I think it's a misnomer. I mean, it probably should really be better termed an academic portfolio, because it really depends on what your strengths are. And I think the important thing is you definitely have to play to your strengths. If you're an administrator within your department, then certainly things that you've developed administratively, guidelines that have changed practice, that have changed patient care, those things can easily be tailored to a portfolio, but it's just going to look a little bit different than kind of a standard teaching portfolio. If I had to give you just one piece of advice, if I had to come up here and say one slide only, you have to be familiar with your institutional guidelines. What I've run across over the years a few times are people that are already knee-deep in developing their teaching portfolio and then go back and look at their institutional guidelines, and the format is completely different from the way they've been putting it together. So as a junior faculty kind of starting out, finishing their fellowship, or someone who's pretty junior in your career path as a faculty member, get a copy of your institutional promotion guidelines. And I think what you'll find is many, if not all, institutions nowadays are going to want you to develop a teaching portfolio for that promotion process. It's not as easy as just throwing that together. I mean, this sometimes can take a fair amount of time because, again, there's a reflective process with this. But you have to be pretty familiar with your own institutional guidelines because it's absolutely going to shape the way your teaching portfolio looks. At my institution, they don't provide a tremendous amount of guidelines, so we're still back in the 3-ring binder. I mean, my teaching portfolio, I've printed out and kind of keep on my desk, so in case I ever need to flip through it. But in our institution, all the different documents are ultimately coalesced into one huge PDF when it's sent out to the promotions and tenure committee. At some institutions, it's online, and it's kind of web-based, so it's a very different format, and you don't kind of have that tangible piece of paper. But you have to be familiar with your institutional guidelines. Now, these are some of the elements that I think you'll find pretty consistently across many teaching portfolios, and this is what is listed for my institution with, again, very little guidance. And what I would tell you is if you spend a fair amount of time on the internet, many universities and a number of different medical schools have a fair amount of information available, and I'll provide you with a little bit of resources at the back end. Now, you have to have a table of contents. Now, this may not necessarily be the first thing that you do. I think a lot of times you'll shape your teaching portfolio and then you go back and refine your table of contents. But the table of contents is not as much for you as it's for the reader. I mean, that's going to be most important. And you have to realize that in many instances, when your teaching portfolio is submitted to your promotions and tenure committee, it's going to be looked at by non-emergency physicians. It's going to be looked at by other clinical faculty. It's going to be looked at potentially by some administration in the medical school. It's going to be looked at by a number of basic science faculty. So you really have to spell things out, and I think it's very important for you to really spend that time so that the table of contents organizes things so that it really allows you to kind of put your best foot forward. Now, where do you start? Now, this is probably an optional part of your teaching portfolio. I would look at it as akin to a bio. You know, when you sometimes present at a particular conference, they want you to send a bio, kind of describe your practice. So this is not something I think that I would see uniformly across the board in every teaching portfolio. And this is not your teaching philosophy. This is your narrative that really describes kind of maybe how you got to where you are in your career at this time. Maybe it doesn't apply as much to you, right? You're just finishing your fellowship, but someone who's 8 or 10 or 12 years out, I mean, you know, you went through kind of probably various different career paths to lead you to where you are. And it's really an opportunity to kind of describe what your current clinical practice is like and how much time do you spend on teaching at the bedside, how much time do you spend kind of in the classroom, what your research interests are, etc. But again, it's not your teaching philosophy. The executive summary also, again, depends on your own institution. This is a copy of what's filled out for University of California at San Francisco. And for their kind of executive summary, this narrative asks them to really describe and kind of go into their most significant teaching contribution. And if you look at that, and I think what's interesting is if you kind of are putting your teaching portfolio together and we're not aware of what the expectations were, you're going to have some challenges. So I think it's most important early on from day one, be aware of what those expectations are, because again, it allows you to then shape the narrative to kind of fit their expectations. Now, the teaching philosophy, I think when you look at most folks putting together a teaching portfolio, they would say the two most important parts are developing your teaching philosophy, right? It's akin to your personal statement when you're applying for residency programs, but also, you know, all of your teaching activities. And many times your teaching activities, it's gathering a lot of data, and it's going back and kind of sifting through, you know, all of your past endeavors. But your teaching philosophy is, I think, in many ways challenging for us to put together because we've been teaching, right? I mean, you've been teaching, some of us, for 8 or 10 or more years, and now you have to sit back, because many of us have not written this from day one, as to really what is my teaching philosophy? Why do I teach? Why do I enjoy it? What do I want my students to get out of my teaching? What is my approach to try to learning? You know, and I tell you, it's like when you read personal statements for people applying to residency, it's a story, right? I mean, you know, some people are very kind of regimented, and you know, I became a physician because blah 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 blah. But sometimes it can be a story, and what you really want to do is describe the narrative of why you know, at your heart want to be a teacher and what you kind of bring to the table. Now, I put this up there just to kind of get a sense. This is a very small snippet from one of the law professors at Temple when I was reviewing teaching portfolios for an institutional award. And this just particular passage kind of struck me. And the way this particular faculty member wrote his teaching philosophy was he kind of introduced himself a little bit and then listed about 4 or 5 different core values, things that he felt kind of really, you know, is what he brought to the table as a teacher. And I'm not going to read it out to everybody, but it really is reflective. And I think you have to go back even as far as identifying, you know, who have been your mentors. You know, I mean, we all probably can look back during medical school or maybe during residency, and it's that 1 or 2 people. And I could even think of colleagues that I've worked with that I emulate and kind of like just, you know, I enjoy watching them teach others because they just have a great style. But there's a lot of things that will influence all of us that you at some point have to put on paper that will represent your teaching philosophy. If you take a look at, you know, probably in some ways the bulk of your teaching portfolio, it's really to summarize your teaching activities. And I think, again, as a reflective process, it allows you to go back and be really cognizant of what you're teaching, how you're teaching it, who you're teaching it to, you know, whether it's bedside or whether it's classroom or whether it's workshop or whether it's active learning or whether it's, you know, there's lots of different things nowadays. But you really have to go down to the content, not just exactly what you're teaching, and that's maybe in a section we'll talk about in a couple minutes of curriculum development. But really, the nitty-gritty. And again, it depends on how your institution wants you to document that teaching. Again, another example from University of California at San Francisco, they have this online form that gets filled out that, at least for your teaching role, it's very similar to Glassix's criteria for educational scholarship, where you're listing, how you're building on kind of best practice, what your goals and objectives are, what your teaching methods are, what are the results and impact of your teaching on your learners, how is it disseminated, how have you critiqued your teaching. So, again, if you look at this kind of on the back end and we're not prepared to kind of organize your teaching, then it could be challenging completing a document to this level. You take a look at some other institutions, this is a little bit less rigid. This is from Vanderbilt. But ultimately, you're documenting the course title, whether it's a required or an elective course, some information about the type of teaching. And where we are at my institution, it's actually much more free form. And you may find out that at your institution, it is free form. So I didn't really have a tremendous amount of guidelines or guidance necessarily, only because they, I don't know, I guess in some ways it's good. They give us the freedom of developing it the way we would like to. Please come on in. There's tons of seats. No worry, no standing room only back there. But again, what you have the opportunity to do, because what you have to realize is the folks that are going to be reading your teaching portfolio may not have really much of an understanding of what we do as emergency physicians in regards to, and again, these are just some of the things I've been involved with, just kind of a snippet, but ultimately they may not have any understanding of what your role is as running your clerkship, or as a program director, or as running a introduction to a clinical skills course. So you generally will have some opportunity to provide that narrative, but in addition, what type of time constraints does it take for you to teach those courses? So you do have a lot of opportunities, but that's going to be a strong focus of your teaching portfolio. Kind of the next step, and that kind of all is integrated together, is the teaching evaluations. And it's not just, the hard data. It may also include certainly your, the descriptive comments that the students feel or the residents feel about your teaching, but educational or teaching awards, letters of appreciation, etc. So hopefully if you are in an institution that's gathering a good amount of data, you'll get some semi-annual reviews of your teaching by your residents, or if you're teaching the basic science programs or your clerkship evaluations. So whether it looks something like this or various different ways of gathering that information, I think when you're taking your teaching scores and putting it into some type of spreadsheet where it's really black and white, where you can kind of get a much better look at it, it allows the reader to have a much better understanding of kind of where you fall on that spectrum. Honors and awards, I think, are obviously always equally as important. And what you'll find out is if you don't have the opportunity to be put up for certain awards, think about developing awards. At our institution, there was a big push recently, and the administration was very receptive to start to identify teaching awards in different years of the medical school. So before, we never had, for example, an opportunity for, let's say, a year one basic science faculty member to win a teaching award. And that's something that they kind of recently just developed. But whether it's a medical student teaching award or from your residency program, or obviously here at, SAEM or CORD or CDEM, there's lots of potential opportunities out there. But these teaching awards really do make a big difference, and I think are recognized very strongly by your promotions and tenure committee. Letters of appreciation, I think, also are things that you should keep track of. And for some of us, I think, that have been doing this for a while, I mean, anytime you go to a national conference and you speak, and then 2 months later you get this email that probably looks like spam, and you realize that it's just a evaluation of your, of your teaching at the particular conference, just put that into an email folder. You should be saving kind of all that information, because that's the kind of stuff that should be incorporated into your teaching portfolio. Again, whether you get testimonials from learners or, and again, there's a number of institutions right now that provide some peer coaching or peer review from other faculty members as you're developing your own kind of teaching philosophy and your teaching prowess within your institution. All that kind of information is going to be very helpful, not only to shape you as a teacher, but to potentially put in and have it be part of your teaching portfolio. Now, curriculum development, I think, is an area that is, again, if you go back to that initial kind of pie chart that I had earlier, where you have a lot of different components of your teaching portfolio. I think many of us, maybe all of us, should strive at some point to develop original curriculum. Whether you take something and develop it from scratch or whether you modify something that's pre-existing, I think this is a great opportunity for you then to hit on many areas, from educational scholarship to, other areas of educational research. But curriculum development, and it's important when you're developing that teaching portfolio that you're going to link out many times to a number of different appendices, because the teaching portfolio is just part of that document. It's going to link out to, a number of, whether you presented nationally and you want to include, an example of a great talk that you did. And it's interesting when you look at teaching portfolios in general, they're very fluid. One of the portfolios that I looked at, again, for an institutional award at our university was from a faculty member in the School of Music. And their teaching portfolio included a large number of direct links out to video performances of him, playing his musical instrument. So depends on what your focus is, it's going to look very different. And I think all of our teaching portfolios will have some similarities, but will focus and really be different based on individually what we are interested in. Educational leadership, again, is another real important area to focus on. And again, whether you have some educational leadership within your institution or nationally, that I think says a lot for, your teaching abilities. Professional development, some of us, again, whether you're coming here to SAEM or Merck at Cord or the ASAP Teaching Fellowship, there's lots of opportunities to, continue to, improve your professional development by attending a number of these educational courses that also, in some way, should be reflected in your teaching portfolio. And I think what's most important is we're all clinician educators, but we're all very different. And I think you'll find some people that may add some of this information into that original narrative where you describe your clinical practice. But if you do have some productivity matrix or patient satisfaction scores, or even letters from patients kind of thanking you for your care of them, those are kind of things that can also be put into your portfolio. And I think one thing that is important, and I mentioned this a few minutes ago, we're all different, right? We all have different areas of academic or clinical focus. Maybe some on UME, some on GME, or some of us have trained in various clinical subspecialties that your academic career is going to build off your ultrasound interest or your EMS interest, et cetera. So what I think is real important for you to be focusing on as you're kind of developing yourself both as an educator and a clinician is, killing the two birds with one stone. So there are opportunities many times as a junior faculty where, let's say, maybe a senior faculty will say, hey, I'm writing this textbook, do you want to be a co-author? And the trickle-down effect. So if you ever get a chance down the road to write a book chapter, or you're writing a case report, or a review on a particular topic, take that and become the expert on it. Develop grand rounds, develop a lecture on it, shop it around locally, shop it around nationally. And then ultimately, you start becoming the person that people maybe in your department or outside go to because they know you have an interest in that area. Or it works the other way around. If you have a clinical interest in a particular area, develop a lecture on that topic or try to write something about it. And ultimately, it's not that difficult. So one of our faculty members had an interest for quite a number of years, still does, on opioid prescribing practices in the emergency department. And what he translated that into is basically an operational guideline within our department. Then he looked both at prescribing patterns of our faculty before and after the guideline was implemented, had a peer-reviewed publication, and also developed a nice lecture that he has given at a number of different local grand rounds institutions. So there's lots of opportunities. So, kind of the gold standard of things that you would ultimately want in your teaching portfolio from an area of clinical expertise is peer review and dissemination. And that's something that you'll hear, in regards to educational scholarship numerous times. But again, if you have that interest, kill two birds with one stone. If you're interested in a particular topic, make a lecture out of it. Try to write a book chapter. Try to do something that will kind of increase your, reputation regarding that particular area. Now, there are a number of resources. There's, many, great resources out there. The University of Washington has a nice review on developing teaching portfolios. And again, I think as you're putting it together, you want to read kind of the philosophy of how other people kind of view this particular document. University of California at San Francisco also has some good resources on their homepage. The Academic Pediatric Association, what I think is most helpful on this document, is the Educator Portfolio Template. And this is a blank template that you can use kind of on an annual basis to really look at your accomplishments for the year, but also look at maybe your future goals and objectives. And I think this is a good starting point. Many of us, if not all of us, are meeting with our chairman on an annual basis. This is a great document if you don't have something internally to work on and submit to your chairman as you're getting ready to meet with him or her at the end of each academic year. SAEM also has some resources on there, although this is kind of a site that looks like it's still in development. And again, the Cord Academy Awards, these are some great opportunities for us to receive some national recognition within our own specialty. There are a number of different awards that Cord provides, but if you look at just the way they recommend putting your promotion or your award materials together, there's a lot of great background information here which can be helpful in developing this portfolio. And again, the final point I would say is you're certainly going to be updating your CV more frequently. Many of us probably update our CV, every couple of months or so. But use your CV as the framework for developing your teaching portfolio. But your teaching portfolio often is not updated quite as frequent as your CV. And I believe that is it. What I would tell you is, please feel free to contact me. I'd be happy to provide you with some additional material on the back end or advice or, have some conversation kind of offline. But thank you for the opportunity. If there's any questions, please let me know. All right.